a man who believed he was already king of the city. Tonight was not just a celebration, it was a coronation. He was ascending to the board of Sterling and Finch Global, a position that solidified his place among the titans of industry. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, the glint in the mirror matching the cold ambition in his eyes. Standing beside him, a vision in emerald silk, was Penelope, his beautiful, pliant secret. He was bringing his future to a party meant to honor his past, a past he was all too ready to discard, starting with the woman who still bore his name. He was about to learn that when you build your empire on a foundation of lies, the collapse doesn't just make a sound. It creates a shockwave. The penthouse on Park Avenue was a monument to success, or more accurately, to Richard Sterling's perception of it. Spanning 2 floors with panoramic views of Central Park, it was less a home and more a curated gallery of wealth. Minimalist Italian furniture sat on vast expanses of white marble, and the walls were adorned with abstract art that Richard neither liked nor understood, but which had been selected by a high-priced consultant for its significant investment potential. It was a cold, impersonal space, a perfect reflection of the marriage it housed. Catherine Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights begin to sparkle like a carpet of fallen stars. She held a tablet in her hand, its screen glowing with complex data streams and lines of code. To anyone else, it would be indecipherable. To her, it was a symphony. For the past 3 years, this was her real life, her real passion, conducted in the quiet hours after midnight and before dawn, a world away from the charity luncheons and society dinners that constituted her public-facing life as Mrs. Sterling. She heard the soft click of the bedroom door, and didn't need to turn to know Richard was there, preening for his big night. The air suddenly felt heavier, charged with his colossal ego. "You're not ready," he stated, his voice, a smooth baritone, laced with impatience. It wasn't a question. Catherine finally turned. She was dressed in simple, elegant black trousers and a cashmere sweater. Her auburn hair was tied back, and her face was free of makeup. She looked comfortable, focused, and completely out of place with the evening's expected glamour. "I wasn't planning on going, Richard." "We discussed this," she said calmly, her eyes not leaving his. "You said it was a company-only affair, and my presence would be a distraction." The lie had been so transparent, so insulting in its lack of effort, but she had let it go. Arguing with Richard was like wrestling with smoke. He was impossible to pin down, and you only ended up smelling of his own self-importance. Richard scoffed, straightening the knot of his silk tie. "That was before. Alistair Finch specifically mentioned he was looking forward to seeing you. It's bad form if the guest of honor's wife doesn't show. It looks unstable." He didn't care about Alistair's wishes. He cared about the optics. An absent wife might suggest marital trouble, and any hint of trouble was a crack in the perfect facade he had spent his life constructing. "Unstable." Catherine repeated, a faint, humorless smile touching her lips. "And what would you call bringing your executive assistant to a black tie event as your date? Is that the new definition of stability?" She knew about Penelope Vance. Of course she knew. The late-night strategy sessions, the sudden business trips to romantic destinations, the lingering scent of a different perfume on his suits. Richard wasn't a master of espionage. He was just arrogant enough to believe she was too stupid or too placid to notice. Richard's jaw tightened. He strode across the marble floor, his expensive leather shoes echoing in the cavernous room. He stopped before her, using his height to loom over her. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one that had lost its power years ago. "Penelope is a valuable member of my team. Her presence is professional, he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. This is my night, Catherine, the culmination of 20 years of work. Do not try to spoil it with your petty jealousies. You have everything a woman could ever want. This apartment, the credit cards, the social standing. All I ask in return is that you play your part. And tonight, your part is to either show up and smile, or stay here and remain invisible. Your choice. He thought he was offering her an ultimatum. In reality, he was giving her a gift. Catherine looked from his cold, dismissive face to the tablet in her hand. On the screen was the final confirmation of a seed funding round that had just closed, $50 million. Her company Auratech, a venture, he laughed off as her little computer hobby was now valued at $250 million. It was a secret she had guarded jealously, a world he had no part in, a success he couldn't claim. "You're right, Richard," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "It's your night. You should enjoy it exactly as you see fit." She turned back to the window, the city lights reflected in her determined eyes. "I wouldn't want to be a distraction." He took her placid agreement as submission as it was intended. A smug smile spread across his face. He had won. He always won. "Good," he said, turning on his heel. "I'll have the driver take you to your mother's in the morning. I'll be busy this weekend." He walked out the scent of his cologne, a sharp, aggressive fragrance, called invincible, lingering in the air like a pollutant. Catherine didn't watch him go. She was already back to work, her fingers flying across the screen. He thought her world was this apartment, these jewels his name. He had no idea that she was building an entirely new world for herself, one where he didn't even exist. And tonight, while he celebrated a promotion he felt he was owed, she would be closing the deal that would finally set her free. The irony was so rich, so delicious, she almost laughed out loud. He wanted her to be invisible. He was about to get his wish in a way he could never possibly imagine. Penelope Vance traced the rim of her champagne flute, the crystal cool against her nervous fingers. She was sitting in the back of Richard's chauffeured Maybach, the buttery leather seats a world away from her cramped studio apartment in the East Village. The emerald silk of her gown shimmered under the city lights as they sped towards the Grand Astoria Hotel. The dress was a gift from Richard, of course. Everything was a gift from Richard. It was a beautiful dress, but it felt like a costume, and she felt like an imposter. She was only 26 years old, sharp and ambitious, but hopelessly entangled. When she'd first joined Sterling and Finch as a junior analyst 2 years ago, Richard Sterling was a legend, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the hallways. He was brilliant, ruthless, and captivating. When his attention had turned to her, it had felt like being anointed. He'd promoted her to his executive assistant, mentored her, and then seduced her. He had painted a beautiful picture of their future. A messy but necessary divorce. A new life together, where she would be his partner in every sense of the word. He said Catherine was a relic from a previous life, a society wife who didn't understand him or his ambition. Penelope, he'd whispered, was his equal, his future. She had chosen to believe him, clinging to those promises like a life raft. Tonight was supposed to be the first step into that future. Nervous, Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. He reached over, placing his hand on her knee. His touch was proprietary, confident. A little, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Richard, are you sure about this? Walking in with me? Everyone will know." "What about your wife?" Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Catherine is a non-issue. She's agreed to be discreet. She understands the arrangement." This was another of his casual lies designed to soothe her, but it pricked at Penelope's conscience. He made his wife sound like a business partner, agreeing to a merger, not a woman being publicly humiliated. And Mr. Finch, she pressed. Alistair Finch was the firm's patriarch, an old money icon with a reputation for integrity and a low tolerance for scandal. Alistair cares about one thing: results. My division has posted record profits for 8 consecutive quarters. I've made him and our shareholders hundreds of millions of dollars. He's not going to derail my promotion over something as trivial as my choice of dinner companion, Richard said with unshakable confidence. Tonight, Penny is about power. It's about showing everyone that I do what I want. That I have what I want. And I want you. He leaned in and kissed her a hard, possessive kiss that tasted of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction. Penelope kissed him back, but a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She was a gamble, the biggest gamble of Richard's career. He was betting his entire reputation that he was too powerful to fall, and he was betting her future right alongside his. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Astoria, flanked by reporters and photographers for the society pages, the reality of it hit her. This wasn't a quiet dinner. It was a public declaration. Richard was using her as a human press release to announce the end of his marriage. The chauffeur opened the door, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying the sound of camera shutters, clicking like a swarm of insects. Richard stepped out first, a conquering hero basking in the flashbulbs. He then turned and extended his hand to her. Taking it was the point of no return. Her face would be in every financial paper and gossip column by morning. Richard Sterling and mystery brunette? She would no longer be Penelope Vance, the bright young analyst. She would be the other woman, the home wrecker, the mistress. For a fleeting second, she hesitated. She could shrink back into the shadows of the car, tell the driver to take her home, and salvage what was left of her reputation. She could go back to her life, ungifted, unkept but her own. But then she saw the look on Richard's face as he waited for her. The supreme confidence, the promise of a world of power and luxury in his eyes. He wasn't just offering her his hand. He was offering her the world, or so he made it seem. The life he promised was intoxicating, a siren song for a girl who had grown up with nothing. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders and placed her hand in his. The emerald dress, the borrowed jewels, the carefully styled hair, it was her armor now. She stepped out of the car and into the blinding light of the flashbulbs linking her arm with Richard's. She was no longer just Penelope Vance. She was Richard Sterling's future. It was a role she had gambled everything to play, and she could only pray the price wasn't too high. The Grand Astoria's ballroom was a cathedral of capitalism. Soaring ceilings were draped in gold leaf, and 3 colossal crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a warm, brilliant light over the assembled crowd. The air buzzed with the low hum of powerful conversations, a symphony of stock tips, political maneuvering, and discreet gossip, all punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses filled with vintage champagne. This was the beating heart of New York's financial elite, and tonight Richard Sterling was its honored guest. He made his entrance with Penelope on his arm, and a wave of silence rippled through the room. It was not a respectful hush, but a vacuum of shock. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned first in curiosity, then in undisguised astonishment. Every eye in the room registered the same facts. Richard Sterling, the man of the hour, had arrived, not with his elegant, socially impeccable wife, Catherine, but with a stunningly beautiful and conspicuously young woman they had never seen before. Richard revelled in it. This was exactly the effect he had wanted. It was a shock and awe campaign, waged on the battlefield of social perception. He glided into the room, a smug, triumphant smile plastered on his face, nodding at colleagues and rivals alike. He was a predator marking his territory, and Penelope, beautiful and nervous in her emerald gown, was the flag he was planting. "Richard, you old dog," boomed a portly man named Walter Harrison, head of a rival investment bank. His eyes flickered down to Penelope and back up, a lecherous grin spreading across his face, always closing the most ambitious deals. Richard laughed, a hearty artificial sound. "Walter, good to see you. I'd like you to meet Penelope Vance, my executive assistant. She's been instrumental to our division's success this year." He emphasized her title, a flimsy shield of professionalism that fooled no one. Penelope offered a tight smile and a polite handshake, feeling Walter's eyes linger on her far too long. She felt like a prized horse, being shown off at auction, her value assessed, and her purpose silently understood by everyone in the room. The whispers followed them as they moved deeper into the crowd. "That's not Catherine, brazen even for him, must be 20 years younger. Where on earth is his wife?" Richard was deaf to it, or perhaps he simply interpreted the shock as admiration for his audacity. He moved from group to group, accepting congratulations, his arm possessively wrapped around Penelope's waist. He was holding court, introducing her to the titans of their industry men, with names like Hawthorne DuPont and Vanderbilt. To her credit, Penelope held her own. She was intelligent and well-versed in the language of their world, speaking confidently about market trends and Q4 projections. Some of the men were impressed, but the women looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. They were the wives, the Catherines of this world, and in Penelope they saw a threat, a cliché, and a future of loneliness. Richard eventually led her to the main table at the front of the room, reserved for the guest of honor and the company's senior partners. Seated at the head of the table was the man Richard both revered and sought to conquer, Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch was in his late 70s with a shock of perfectly white hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore his power not like Richard's shiny new suit of armor, but like a comfortable, well-worn coat. He commanded respect without ever having to demand it. As Richard approached, Mr. Finch's gaze fell upon Penelope, and his expression, usually a mask of polite neutrality, tightened almost imperceptibly. "Richard, Mr. Finch," said his voice, quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority. "Congratulations on a stellar year." "Thank you, Alistair. It means the world coming from you," Richard beamed, practically glowing with pride. "You know my executive assistant, Penelope Vance." Mr. Finch's cool eyes met Penelope's. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Miss Vance." There was no warmth in his greeting. He then looked around the table and at the empty seat beside Richard. "And Catherine, is she not joining us this evening?" The directness of the question momentarily threw Richard off his stride. He had expected the whispers, the gossip, but not a direct inquiry from the man who chaired the board. He recovered quickly, his voice smooth as silk. Unfortunately, Catherine was feeling a bit under the weather. She sends her deepest regrets, and her congratulations, of course. The lie was effortless, practiced. Alistair Finch held Richard's gaze for a long moment. He didn't challenge the lie, but he didn't accept it either. He simply stared, and in that silent, unnerving gaze, a judgment was passed. He then turned his attention back to the papers in front of him, a subtle but clear dismissal. The interaction left Richard feeling a flicker of unease for the first time that night. He had expected Finch to respect his power play, to see it as the mark of a man who takes what he wants, a quality Finch himself was famous for. But the old man's reaction had been cold, disapproving. Richard quickly shook it off. It didn't matter. In 30 minutes, Finch would get up on that stage and announce his promotion to the board. He would be untouchable. The old guard was on its way out, and he was the future. He squeezed Penelope's hand under the table, a gesture of reassurance that was more for himself than for her. He had made his move, placed his bet. The entire room was watching. All that was left was to collect his winnings. As dinner service began, the initial shock of Richard's entrance coalesced into a thick, palpable cloud of gossip. It drifted between tables, carried on hushed tones that were barely audible over the string quartet playing softly in the corner. The clinking of silverware against fine china was a counterpoint to the relentless murmur of speculation. Penelope felt as though she were under 1,000 microscopes, each person dissecting her dress, her youth, her very presence at Richard's side. "He's finally done it," murmured Beatrice Hawthorne, a society doyenne whose husband ran a major hedge fund. She leaned towards a friend, her diamond necklace glittering. "I always knew he had a vulgar streak. Catherine is a saint to have put up with him for this long. She's not just a saint, she's class personified." Her friend, a woman named Carol, replied, taking a delicate sip of wine. "She's the reason he got into the St. Andrew's Club. He was just a brutish corporate raider before she smoothed his edges. Now look at him. He's brought his secretary to his own promotion party. It's positively medieval." At a nearby table, a group of Richard's junior executives watched with a mixture of awe and terror. "That's a power move I wouldn't even try in a video game, one of them." A young man named Ben whispered to his colleague. "It's not power, it's suicide," replied another Sarah who had worked with Catherine on a charity board. "He has no idea who he's married to. He thinks she just plans parties and picks out flowers. He's a fool," Ben scoffed. "A fool who's about to be named to the board of a Fortune 500 company. Looks like it's working out for him." Sarah just shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "Just wait. The third act of this play hasn't started yet." Richard, oblivious to the nuances of the room's judgment, was in his element. He mistook the stares for admiration and the whispers for talk of his undeniable success. He held Penelope's hand on the table, a public display of ownership. He talked loudly about his plans for the new division he was set to lead, his voice booming with confidence. Penelope, however, was acutely aware of the room's real temperature. She could feel the icy stares of the wives and the speculative glances of the men. She tried to engage in conversation to prove she was more than the arm candy Richard was treating her as, but her words felt hollow. Her mind kept drifting back to Catherine Sterling. She had only seen her once from a distance at a company holiday party a year ago. Catherine had been graceful, warm, and radiated an effortless intelligence that made people lean in to listen. She was, Penelope had to admit, everything she was not, and Richard was throwing that woman away for her. The thought was both intoxicating and terrifying. Across the room, Alistair Finch observed the spectacle from his seat at the head table. He ate his pan-seared scallops with a slow, methodical precision, his face an unreadable mask. But his eyes missed nothing. He saw the way Richard puffed out his chest, preening for the crowd. He saw the nervous tremor in Penelope's hand as she reached for her water glass. He saw the pitying looks and the scornful smiles being exchanged throughout the ballroom. His chief counsel, a sharp-eyed man named Robert Conway, leaned over. "This is a bad look, Alistair. The press will have a field day. It's a character issue." Finch placed his fork down deliberately. He looked at Conway, his gaze steely. "Character is everything, Robert. A man who publicly dishonors the person who helped build his foundation is a man who cannot be trusted with the foundation of a multinational corporation. He thinks loyalty is a one-way street. He sees people as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be discarded." "So what are you going to do?" Robert asked, his voice low. "The promotion has already been approved by the board. It's just an announcement." Alistair Finch picked up his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid. A cryptic smile played on his lips. The board approved the promotion, based on a set of assumptions. One of those assumptions was Richard's sound judgment. Another more critical assumption, he paused, taking a slow sip, was based on a forthcoming acquisition that Richard knows nothing about. An acquisition that is set to become the new cornerstone of his entire division. Robert looked confused. What acquisition? Finch's smile widened slightly. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones we fail to see, even when they're living under our own roof. He set his glass down and nodded toward the stage where the Master of Ceremonies was approaching the podium to begin the speeches. I believe it's time for the evening's main event. I, for one, am very much looking forward to my toast. Robert watched the old man, a sense of foreboding and excitement mixing in his gut. This was no longer just a promotion party. It was a chessboard, and Alistair Finch, the Grandmaster, was about to make a move that would change the entire game. The whispers in the crystal glasses were about to become a deafening roar. While Richard was basking in the spotlight at the Grand Astoria, Catherine Sterling was in a different kind of temple of power. She was on the 60th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district, in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom overlooking the glittering expanse of Lower Manhattan. The air here wasn't filled with perfume and champagne, but with the electric tension of a high-stakes negotiation that had just reached its conclusion. Across the polished mahogany table sat Alistair Finch's legal team, led by Robert Conway, and a delegation from Sterling and Finch Global's Mergers and Acquisitions Department. Catherine was flanked by her two co-founders, David Chen, a genius coder, who was the architect of their platform, and Maria Flores, a logistics and operations wizard. The table was littered with empty coffee cups, binders of legal documents, and the palpable aura of exhaustion and exhilaration. For the past 72 hours they had been locked in this room, hammering out the final details of the deal. Sterling and Finch Global was acquiring her company Auratech for an astonishing $1.2 billion. Auratech was her brainchild, born from the frustration of watching the inefficient and archaic systems used by the charities she had worked with. She had envisioned an AI-driven logistics platform that could revolutionize supply chain management, not just for non-profits, but for any global enterprise. While Richard was dismissing her work as a hobby, she was building an empire in stealth mode, pouring the lonely hours of her empty marriage into code strategy and relentless innovation. The final red lines are incorporated, Robert Conway announced, his voice tired but respectful. He pushed a final document across the table. All that's left is your signature, Ms. Sterling. Ms. Sterling? He had addressed her by her professional title all week. Not once had he mentioned her connection to Richard. Alistair Finch had insisted on it. He was buying her company for its brilliance, not for her name. It was a level of respect Richard had never shown her. Catherine picked up the heavy, expensive pen. This was it. The culmination of years of secret work, of believing in herself, when her own husband saw her as nothing more than a decoration. Her hand was steady as she signed her name, the ink flowing in a smooth, confident script. It felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. As the lawyers began gathering the documents, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Sarah, her friend from the charity board. He's here. With her. He brought Penelope Vance to the party. A picture followed. Richard beaming with Penelope on his arm, the emerald of her dress a slash of color against the crowd. Catherine stared at the image and felt nothing. The searing pain of betrayal had long ago cooled into a hard, clear resolve. She didn't see a cheating husband. She saw a liability, a foolish, arrogant man making a spectacle of himself. Then a second text from Sarah arrived. Alistair Finch asked where you were. Richard told him you were sick. That sparked something. Not hurt, but a cold, calculated anger. He was using her as a shield, lying to the very man she had just spent 3 days negotiating with. A man who knew exactly where she was and what she was doing. Maria saw the look on her face. "Everything okay?" Cat Catherine looked up from her phone, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "Everything is perfect," she said. She stood up, her posture radiating a newfound power. "Gentleman Maria David, thank you for your incredible work. I believe we have a celebration to attend." Robert Conway looked at his watch. "The party at the Astoria. It's already well underway." I know Catherine said, her eyes glinting. "I wouldn't want to miss the toast." 45 minutes later, a black town car pulled up to the Grand Astoria. The press had mostly dispersed, but a few stragglers remained. When the door opened, they were stunned to see Catherine Sterling emerge. She was not dressed in the expected evening gown. She wore the same outfit she'd been wearing to close the biggest deal of her life, a tailored midnight blue pantsuit that was the epitome of corporate power, paired with a simple silk shell. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of subtle diamond stud earrings. She looked less like a society wife and more like a CEO. She looked like she owned the building. She walked through the hotel lobby, her heels clicking with purpose on the marble floor. She didn't need to be announced. As she paused at the entrance to the ballroom, a wave of recognition rippled through the room. The whispers started again, but this time they were different. It wasn't just shock. It was confusion, intrigue. The woman who was supposedly at home under the weather was here. And she did not look sick. She looked formidable. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the dozens of stunned faces until they landed on the main table. She saw Richard, who was in the middle of a self-aggrandizing story, his back to the door. She saw Penelope, who looked pale and stricken, and she saw Alistair Finch, who looked directly at her, met her gaze, and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The Master of Ceremonies was at the podium. "And now it is my great honor to introduce the chairman of the board, the visionary leader of Sterling and Finch Global, Mr. Alistair Finch, who would like to propose a toast." Catherine smiled. Her timing was perfect. She began to walk slowly, deliberately, towards the front of the room, an unseen guest who was about to become the center of everyone's universe. A respectful hush fell over the Grand Astoria ballroom as Alistair Finch, a man whose quiet words could move markets, approached the heavy oak podium. The crystal chandeliers seemed to dim slightly, focusing their brilliant light on the stage, casting him in an almost reverential glow. Richard Sterling sat back in his chair, the fine wool of his Brioni suit feeling like a second skin. He gave Penelope's hand a confident squeeze under the table, a broad, self-satisfied grin stretching across his face. He felt like a Roman emperor in his triumphal chariot, waiting for the laurels to be placed upon his head. "Get ready to applaud for your favorite executive," he whispered, his chest swelling with a near unbearable sense of pride. This was it. The culmination of his life's work. The moment of his ascension. Mr. Finch adjusted the microphone, his calm winter sky eyes sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. He saw the whispers, the knowing glances, the unsubtle drama Richard had so carelessly invited into this room, and his gaze lingered for a moment on the side of the stage, where he saw Catherine standing poised and silent, a queen waiting patiently to reclaim her kingdom. "Good evening," Finch began, his voice resonant and clear, effortlessly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "We are here tonight to celebrate success, and we have had a great deal of it this year." He smiled warmly, a grandfatherly expression that put the room at ease. "I am particularly proud of the performance of our Global Logistics Division, which has, under the leadership of Richard Sterling, posted 8 consecutive quarters of record-breaking growth." Richard's grin widened. He nodded magnanimously, accepting the praise as his due. This was exactly as it should be. Richard's team has streamlined our European distribution network, secured unprecedented shipping rates in the Asian market, and consistently delivered results that have far exceeded our projections. Finch continued, laying the praise on thick. He has proven himself to be a formidable executive, a man of action and ambition. Richard felt a surge of pure adrenaline. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, a mixture of envy and admiration. This was better than he could have imagined. Finch was not just promoting him. He was anointing him. Finch paused, taking a deliberate sip of water from the glass on the podium. The silence stretched, pregnant with anticipation. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. It was more thoughtful, more philosophical. But numbers on a page, while impressive, are not the true measure of a company's future strength, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. Profit margins and stock prices are fleeting. The true measure of an enduring enterprise is vision. The ability to see not just the next quarter, but the next quarter-century. The courage to pivot, to innovate, to embrace disruption before it disrupts you. A murmur of curiosity rippled through the audience. This was an unexpected turn. A standard toast for a promotion was becoming a lecture on corporate philosophy. Richard's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't part of the script he'd imagined. For over a year, Finch declared, his voice regaining its gravitas. A special projects team, operating under my direct supervision, has been engaged in a quiet, aggressive search. We were not looking for a company to simply acquire. We were looking for a key to unlock the future. We were looking for a quantum leap in efficiency, a predictive AI-driven platform that could not just manage our global supply chain, but anticipate its needs, rerouting shipments based on weather patterns, political instability, and real-time market fluctuations. We found it. The room was buzzing now. This was big news, game-changing news being delivered with theatrical flair. Richard felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. What was this? Why hadn't he been briefed tonight? Finch's voice rose, building to a crescendo. I am thrilled to announce that we have finalized the acquisition of what I believe to be one of the most innovative technology firms of the decade. This isn't just a deal, it's a transformation. The company is called Auratech. At the mention of the name, Richard's blood ran cold. Auratech. The name echoed in his memory, tinny and insignificant. Catherine's little hobby, her database for charities. It couldn't be. He looked at Penelope, who simply shrugged, as confused as he was. It had to be a coincidence. A different company with the same name. Auratech was built from the ground up in stealth, with a brilliance and tenacity that is frankly awe-inspiring. Finch went on, his gaze now fixed not on Richard, but towards the side of the stage. The old man's eyes were filled with a genuine, profound admiration. It was founded by a person of singular vision, a leader who saw a global problem and built a world-changing solution in the hours when most of us were sleeping. This person, this mind, is the real future of our company. The knot of unease in Richard's gut was now a churning pit of dread. The descriptive words, stealth, singular vision, working while others were sleeping, were painting a portrait he was terrified to recognize. His mind scrambled desperately, trying to reject the impossible conclusion that was forming. Finch let the suspense hang for another beat. The promotion we are here to celebrate tonight, he said, his voice now sharp as steel. Each word a hammer, blow the leadership of our new advanced logistics division is entirely contingent upon the successful integration of this new acquisition. The two are inseparable. The promotion does not exist without this deal. The trap had sprung. The foundation of Richard's world crumbled to dust. Finch then smiled a broad, triumphant smile that reached his eyes. It is therefore my profound honor to toast to that success, to our future, and to the brilliant mind that forged it. Please join me in congratulating the founder and CEO of Auratech, the new cornerstone of Sterling and Finch Global, Ms. Catherine Sterling. He gestured directly towards Catherine. A spotlight operator, clearly briefed in advance, swung a brilliant, piercing beam of light to illuminate her where she stood. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. The entire room, a collective entity of hundreds of the most powerful people in the city, held its breath. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then someone began to clap, a slow, deliberate sound. It was Sarah Catherine's friend. Another person joined in, then a dozen, and then the entire ballroom erupted. It was not just applause. It was a detonation of shock and astonishment, a roar of approval for the sheer, breathtaking drama of the moment. Richard Sterling sat frozen, his face ashen, a statue of ruin. The smug grin was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of utter disbelief. It was as if he'd been physically struck. The world had tilted on its axis. The wife he saw as a disposable accessory, the woman he had publicly humiliated moments before, was not only a success, she was his success. She was the bedrock of the very promotion he thought he had earned on his own. He was a king who had just discovered his throne, his castle and his entire kingdom were owned by the quiet librarian he'd banished from the court. Catherine stepped forward gracefully into the light, inclining her head in a modest acknowledgement of the thunderous applause. Her midnight blue pantsuit seemed to absorb the light, making her look impossibly powerful. Her eyes swept across the room and met Richard's. There was no malice in her gaze, no gloating triumph, just a calm, clear statement of irrefutable fact. You underestimated me. The toast that was meant to be Richard's coronation had become the unveiling of his wife's empire and the public spectacle of his own catastrophic miscalculation. The whispers were now a deafening crescendo, and every single person in the room understood Richard Sterling hadn't just brought the wrong woman to the party. He had betrayed the most important person in the building, and he had done it on the biggest night of his life. The applause for Catherine was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over Richard Sterling and seemed to pin him to his chair. For a long, suspended moment, the world went silent in his head. The roar of the crowd, the glittering lights, the face of his wife bathed in the spotlight. It all felt like a surreal, meticulously crafted nightmare. He sat paralyzed, his mind refusing to process the information. Auratech, 1.2 billion. The new cornerstone. The words echoed in the cavernous space of his shattered ego, nonsensical and catastrophic. His first coherent thought was one of utter denial. This is a mistake. A joke. Finch is testing me. He scanned the faces at his table, looking for a sign, a wink, something to signal the punchline was coming. But there was no joke. The partners were staring at Catherine with awe. The lawyers looked grimly satisfied. And Penelope. Penelope was looking at him. The adoration was gone from her eyes. The ambitious sparkle had been extinguished. In its place was a look of dawning horror, the expression of someone who had bet everything on a horse only to watch it collapse with a broken leg just before the finish line. She slowly, deliberately removed her hand from his. The small gesture felt like a final damning verdict. The denial curdled into a hot, blinding rage. This was a conspiracy, a coup. Catherine, with her quiet smiles and her little computer hobby, had been plotting this all along. She had colluded with Finch to orchestrate his public execution. He felt a primal urge to leap up, to scream, to denounce them all. But his limbs were made of lead. He could only sit and watch as the world he commanded reoriented itself around a new center of gravity, his wife. His party, did not so much disintegrate as it reformed. The knots of people who had been orbiting him now broke away their trajectory, shifting decisively toward Catherine. A line began to form. CEOs, hedge fund managers, city officials, all eager to congratulate the new tech mogul to get a piece of the new power player. They swarmed around her, their faces alight with admiration and opportunism. Richard had become a ghost at his own coronation. Walter Harrison, his portly rival, was one of the few who approached his table. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale champagne and schadenfreude. Sterling, he chuckled, clapping a heavy hand on Richard's shoulder. "I have to hand it to you. All these years we thought you were the shark in the family. Turns out you just married it. My congratulations to your wife." He winked a gesture, dripping with malice, and then moved on, eager to spread the story of Richard's epic downfall. Penelope finally stood up, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. The emerald dress that had felt like a symbol of her arrival now felt like a jester's costume. The whispers followed her as she made her lonely exit, but their tone had changed. The earlier scorn was now tinged with a cruel pity. She wasn't the victor's prize. She was the fool's companion. Every eye on her was a reminder of her catastrophic misjudgment. She had gambled her reputation, her career, her future, on a man who was not a king but a hollow facade. Finally, a surge of adrenaline broke Richard's paralysis. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the marble floor, and began to push his way through the crowd. He was a man possessed, his vision tunneled on the woman who had stolen his life. He saw her near the French doors leading to the terrace, accepting congratulations from a senator. He didn't wait. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard and bruising. "Catherine." The senator recoiled in surprise. Catherine didn't flinch. She simply turned her head and looked down at his hand on her arm with an expression of profound disappointment. "Let go of me, Richard," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. The tone, more than the words, made him release her as if he'd been burned. She gave a polite, apologetic nod to the senator. "If you'll excuse us." She led the way onto the deserted terrace, the cool night air a stark contrast to the feverish heat of the ballroom. The distant sounds of city traffic filled the silence between them. "What was that?" he finally managed to choke out his voice, a raw, ragged thing. "What in God's name was that you set me up? You and that old bastard Finch, you conspired to humiliate me." Catherine turned to face him, the city lights behind her creating a halo around her silhouette. She looked ethereal, untouchable. A conspiracy, she said, a small, incredulous smile on her lips. "Richard, you were never important enough for a conspiracy. You were an obstacle, a distraction I had to manage while I was doing actual work. My plot, as you call it, consisted of working 18-hour days for 3 years. It involved securing patents, hiring a team of brilliant engineers, and building something of value while you were on business trips to St. Bart's with your assistants. Do not flatter yourself by thinking you were ever the focus of my attention." The truth of her words was a physical blow. He had been so irrelevant to her that she had built a billion-dollar company without him even noticing. Aura Tech. He stammered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. "You told me it was a non-profit database." "I told you it was a logistics platform for non-profits." You heard the part that allowed you to dismiss it and stopped listening, she corrected him calmly. You were never interested in the details of my life, Richard, only in how my existence served your narrative. The supportive wife, the elegant hostess, the social asset. It turns out you were right about one thing. I am an asset, a $1, 2 billion asset to be precise. I'm just not on your balance sheet. Desperation clawed at him, tearing through the rage. But my promotion, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Finch tied it to the deal. To you. That means we are the deal. Catherine, think of it, sterling and sterling. We can run this together. We can be a true power couple. He was grasping at straws, trying to frame this apocalypse in a language of opportunity he could understand. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not anger or indifference, but a deep, sorrowful pity. It was the look one gives to something that is hopelessly, irrevocably broken. There is no we. Richard, she said softly. There is no us. You burned that bridge tonight. You walked into this room with your infidelity on your arm as a declaration of my worthlessness. You stood there smug and proud while you tried to erase me from your life in front of everyone we know. What you don't seem to understand is that you can't fire someone who has already quit. From the elegant leather portfolio she was carrying, she pulled out a single thick document folded neatly in 3. She held it out to him. My lawyer filed for divorce this morning at 9 a.m. We are legally separated. The petition establishes that Auratech was founded and funded entirely by me using my own premarital assets and inheritance. It is a separate and sole property. It's ironclad. His hand trembled as he took the papers. The formal legal language was a death sentence. As for your promotion, she continued, her voice clinical and precise. Alistair Finch values character and judgment above all else. Tonight you demonstrated to his entire board that you possess neither. You didn't just disrespect your wife, you publicly humiliated the CEO of the company that is now the strategic linchpin of your division. You are a walking, talking, headline-making liability. My sources tell me the board is holding an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. You'll be fired for cause. I'd suggest you read the fine print in your contract regarding the morality clause and its effect on your unvested stock options. He looked down at the papers, then back up at her. His face, a mask of utter devastation. He had lost everything. His wife, his job, his reputation, and a fortune he hadn't even known existed. He had flown too close to the sun, only to discover the sun was his wife, and she had just let him burn. Why he whispered the last of his bravado, gone, leaving only the hollowed-out shell of a man. Why do this? You think this was about you? Catherine replied, her voice softening for a final time. This wasn't revenge, Richard. This was just the truth. This is who I am. You were so busy looking at your own reflection, you never bothered to see the person standing next to you. She gave him one last, lingering look. It was a look of finality, of closure. Then she turned and walked away. A black car, the same one that had been waiting for Finch, was idling at the curb. The chauffeur stepped out and held the door open for her. She didn't look back. Richard Sterling stood alone on the terrace, the cool marble beneath his feet, the divorce petition in his hand, feeling heavier than a tombstone. He looked at his own reflection in the dark glass of the terrace doors, and saw for the first time what everyone else now saw, not a king, not a titan, but a small, foolish man in an expensive suit, a ghost haunting the ruins of an empire he had never truly owned. The story of Richard and Catherine Sterling isn't just a tale of betrayal and revenge. It's a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate often possess the most surprising strength. Richard built his world on arrogance, believing his wife was just another one of his possessions, only to discover she was the architect of her own far grander empire. His public humiliation was not just a twist of fate. It was the inevitable consequence of a man who valued image over integrity and power over partnership. This story shows us that true power isn't about the title you hold or the applause you receive, but about the quiet, determined work you do when no one is watching. It proves that a person's worth is never determined by someone else's dismissive opinion. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Was Richard's downfall deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.